Fred Vasseur may have just turned Russell's pole into Mercedes' worst problem, because Austria was not supposed to end like this. Verstappen crashed at turn 9. Yellow flags appeared. Antonelli backed out. Leclerc was only 2/10 away from taking pole for Ferrari. And then Russell crossed the line fastest. 1 minute, 6.113 seconds. Mercedes celebrated, but Ferrari saw a target. Now Vasseur is questioning whether the lap should have stood at all, and if that challenge gains traction, Russell is not just defending pole position. He is defending the one thing every champion needs: credibility, because Mercedes says Russell lifted for 100 meters. Wolff says he lost around 1/10. The stewards said no further investigation. But Ferrari's question is devastatingly simple. If one Mercedes driver abandoned the lap under yellow flags, why did the other keep going and take pole from Leclerc? That question could turn a front-row fight into a political war. And if Vasseur finds the smallest crack in the original decision, Leclerc could inherit the position Ferrari believes should have been his all along. Subscribe to the channel. The first thing that makes Vasseur's move so dangerous is that he does not need to prove Russell was slow. He only needs to prove the lap was not clean enough. That is the nightmare for Mercedes, because pole position is supposed to be the clearest statement a driver can make. One lap, one clock, one answer. The fastest car starts first. But Austria did not give Mercedes that kind of pole. It gave them a pole wrapped in a question. And once a pole becomes a question, Ferrari has somewhere to attack. The Red Bull Ring was already on edge before the final seconds of qualifying. Ferrari had found real pace. Leclerc was close enough to make Mercedes nervous. Hamilton was close enough to make the front of the grid feel alive. Red Bull was under pressure at its own home race. And Russell needed a lap that did more than put him first. He needed a lap that reminded Mercedes he could still lead. Because inside that team, the pressure is not only coming from Ferrari, is coming from the other side of the garage. Kimi Antonelli has changed the temperature at Mercedes. He is young, fast, and already carrying the kind of championship weight that forces everyone to look at Russell differently. Every Russell result now becomes a message. Every Russell mistake becomes a warning. Every Russell pole becomes evidence that he is not ready to surrender the center of the team. That is why Austria mattered so much. Russell did not only need pole, he needed authority. But the moment Verstappen crashed at turn 9, that authority became vulnerable, because yellow flags appeared. And yellow flags change everything. They tell the drivers that something ahead is wrong. A car may be damaged. Debris may be near the racing line. A driver may be recovering after an impact. Marshals may eventually need the track to be safe enough for them to act. So the instruction is simple. Slow down. Be ready. Respect the danger. But Formula 1 has a way of turning the simplest instruction into a fight over details. How much did Russell slow? Where exactly was the yellow shown? Was it a single yellow or a double yellow? Did he lift early enough? Did he reduce speed clearly enough? Did he still gain too much from a lap that should have been compromised? Those are the questions Ferrari can push. And that is why Vasseur's challenge matters. Because Ferrari is not just complaining that Leclerc lost pole. Ferrari is questioning whether the rule was applied in a way that allowed Mercedes to keep a result that felt, to many people, deeply uncomfortable. From the outside, the sequence is brutal. Verstappen crashes. Yellow flags appear. Antonelli backs out. Russell keeps the lap alive. Russell beats Leclerc by 2/10 and a little more. That is the entire controversy in 5 steps. Mercedes can explain it with the rule book. They can say it was a single yellow. They can say Russell lifted for 100 meters. They can say he lost roughly 1/10. They can say the stewards checked the onboard data and telemetry. They can say the official decision was no further investigation. And all of that matters. But Ferrari has something powerful too. The image. Because fans do not experience the moment as a legal document. They experience it as a crash, a yellow flag, one driver giving up, and another driver taking pole. That image creates doubt before the explanation even starts. And doubt is exactly what Ferrari needs. A team like Ferrari understands that if Mercedes is too strong on pure qualifying pace, the fight has to move somewhere else. It moves to regulations. It moves to procedure. It moves to the gray areas where a rival can be forced to defend instead of celebrate. That is what Vasseur is doing. He is not only protecting Leclerc, he is putting Mercedes in a position where they must keep explaining why Russell's pole is legitimate. And the more Mercedes explains, the less untouchable the pole feels. That is the trap. A clean pole needs no defense. A controversial pole becomes a debate. And once it becomes a debate, Ferrari can turn it into pressure. Leclerc's position makes that pressure sharper. He did not miss pole by a huge margin. He was close. Close enough that every lost fraction matters. Close enough that a yellow flag zone becomes impossible to ignore. Close enough that Ferrari can ask whether the lap should have died the moment the warning appeared. That is not just emotional frustration. That is competitive logic. If a rival beats you by 2/10 and a little more, and that rival passed through a yellow flag sector on the lap that beat you, you study everything. You study the speed. You study the lift. You study the point where the car returns to power. You study whether the lap was truly compromised or whether the driver protected just enough time to survive a review. And if you are Vasseur, you do not let the moment disappear without pressure. Because a team principal has a job that goes beyond strategy. He has to make sure his team does not feel like it accepted injustice too easily. He has to show Leclerc that Ferrari will fight for him. He has to show Mercedes that every gray area will be challenged. He has to show the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile that the standard must be clear enough for the whole paddock to trust. That is why this is bigger than one lap. This is about trust in the decision. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile said there was no further investigation required. That gave Russell the official protection he needed. But an official decision does not always end a Formula One argument, especially when the decision sits between safety and performance. Because yellow flags are not normal racing rules. They carry moral weight. If a driver runs wide, fans argue about track limits. If a driver blocks another car, fans argue about traffic. But if a driver appears to benefit under yellow flags, the argument feels different. It asks whether the driver treated danger seriously enough. That is why Mercedes has to be careful. They cannot make this sound like a minor technicality. They cannot frame it as though yellow flags are just another part of lap optimization. They cannot defend Russell in a way that makes safety sound secondary to pole. But they also cannot allow Ferrari to define the story. So Mercedes has to walk a line almost as narrow as the one Russell drove on track. They need to say Russell complied. They need to say the stewards checked the evidence. They need to say the lap deserved to stand. But they also need to avoid sounding dismissive of the crash that caused the yellow flag in the first place. That is hard. And Ferrari knows it is hard. That is why Vasseur's pressure is so effective. It forces Mercedes into an uncomfortable kind of defense. If Wolff is too calm, people say Mercedes knows it got away with one. If Wolff is too forceful, people say Mercedes is trying to shut down a legitimate safety debate. If Russell says too little, people think he is hiding. If Russell says too much, every word gets compared against the data. There is no perfect answer. That is the genius of the pressure point. And the pressure gets even worse because of Antonelli. Without Antonelli, Mercedes could frame Russell's lap as a simple matter of rules. Single yellow, lift, time loss, pole stands. But Antonelli's choice makes it human. He arrived at the yellow flag situation and backed out. He removed the risk completely. He did not leave himself exposed to a review. He did not ask the stewards to decide whether his lift was enough. He sacrificed the lap. Russell did not. He managed the danger, trusted his response, and took pole. Both decisions can be defended, but only one was rewarded. That is the problem inside Mercedes. Because drivers learn from reward. If a driver backs out under yellow and loses pole, he remembers. If a driver lifts briefly and keeps pole, he remembers too. The next time the same situation appears, those memories matter. Does Antonelli back out again, knowing caution cost him? Does Russell push the limit again, knowing the first decision protected him? Does Mercedes tell both drivers to be more conservative, even if that means losing pole to Ferrari? Or does Mercedes accept that its drivers will operate at the edge because that is how championships are won? This is not just a rule question. It is a team identity question. And Vasseur has pushed it into the open. Ferrari can say the sport needs clarity. Mercedes can say the lap was legal. The stewards can say the data was reviewed. But inside the Mercedes garage, the harder question is about what kind of behavior gets rewarded when the championship is on the line. That is where the tension becomes real. Because Russell wants to be seen as decisive, not reckless. Antonelli wants to be seen as mature, not passive. Mercedes wants both drivers to feel supported, but Austria created a situation where supporting one explanation risks weakening the other. If Mercedes praises Russell's decision, Antonelli's caution looks costly. If Mercedes praises Antonelli's caution, Russell's pole looks more questionable. If Mercedes says both were right, Ferrari can ask why one right decision handed over the lap and the other took pole. That is exactly the kind of contradiction rival teams exploit. Ferrari does not need to sit inside Mercedes to create pressure there. They only need to keep the comparison alive. And the comparison is simple enough for everyone to understand. One Mercedes backed off. One Mercedes did not give up. One Mercedes lost the chance. One Mercedes took pole. That is powerful. It creates a story that does not go away just because the stewards close the file. And for Russell, that is dangerous personally. He already has past yellow flag incidents attached to his career. Those old cases do not prove anything about Austria. They do not mean he broke the rule here. But Formula One has a long memory, and drivers carry reputations whether they like it or not. When a driver with past yellow flag penalties appears in another yellow flag debate, the paddock reacts faster. The arguments become sharper. The trust becomes thinner. That is not always fair, but it is real. And Russell cannot afford a reputation where every yellow flag moment becomes a question. Not while fighting Leclerc. Not while fighting Hamilton. Not while fighting Verstappen. And especially not while fighting Antonelli inside Mercedes. Because a teammate battle is not only about speed. It is about who the team trusts when the pressure becomes complicated. A driver who brings home clean results gives the team calm. A driver who brings home results wrapped in controversy gives the team points, but also stress. Mercedes needs Russell's speed, but it cannot ignore the stress. That is why Vasseur's pressure hurts. It does not just threaten Russell's pole. It threatens the way Mercedes views the cost of Russell's aggression. And aggression is the heart of the issue. Russell's decision can look like champion instinct. He saw the flag, judged the situation, lifted enough, and still completed a brilliant lap. But from Ferrari's side, the same decision can look like an opportunistic use of a gray area. A driver did not abandon the lap while another driver did, and the result changed pole position. Both interpretations can exist at once. That is what makes Formula One controversies so hard to kill. The official result gives one answer. The emotional story gives another. And when those answers do not match, the argument survives.